Welcome back everyone, it's Mindy here today for Lawnfawn, and in today's card we are going to be adding lots of shine and shimmer to our card. One of the things I was really excited about when I seen the new summer 2019 release from Lawnfawn were these background dies. Now yes, you can make some great backgrounds by die cutting them out of cardstock, but I'm going to be turning them into stencils. So the first one I'm playing with is this Sunray backdrop. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to take that and run it through my die cutting machine with white cardstock. Then I'm just going to pop out all of those sunray dies that cut out. And I'm going to take my scissors and following along those sunrays, I am going to snip off those edges. I'm going to use this as a stencil, and I didn't want those edges to be in my way and give me any harsh lines. So once I finished snipping all of those edges off, we're left with the sun and then these sun rays. And you could do ink blending just like this and use that as a stencil. But I'm going to do something a little different with it. Now I'm going to create a background for this stencil that I created. I'm using Blueprint Sketch, Peacock Feathers, and Cracked Pistachio. I'm going to start with my lightest color first. I'm using a piece of Bristol Smooth cardstock, and I do usually start off my cards with a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch size of cardstock, mainly because I'd rather start bigger than too small. So using some of the life-changing blender brushes, I'm going to add that color to my cardstock. One of the reasons I really like using these brushes, which you can use any type of ink blending tool that you have, but the reason I like to use these is they are made of plastic. They're not fibers that are going to absorb your ink, which has, it's easy for cleanup, and it also makes your colors go on so nice and smooth with those bristles. You can't even tell that they're made of plastic. Just make sure to keep them away from your heat tool. I'm going to continue adding more color and blending those colors together so that I have a nice soft transition between the three. I do have a bigger area for the Blueprint Sketch, mainly because I know I'm going to have a sandy beach at the bottom there, so I want to make sure I had room and was able to see that Blueprint Sketch. Then I take the Blueprint Sketch, I just smush a little bit down onto my craft sheet, add a little bit of water with my paintbrush, and I'm going to flick this onto my background. This is going to create some of those water spots, but they're going to be with that Blueprint Sketch, which is just a really nice added interest to that black background and kind of gives the illusion of bubbles. I'm going to use the Stitched Simple Wavy Border die to make a sandy beach, so I'm die cutting that out of kraft cardstock, and I'm just going to hold that in place with the Post-it tape and run that through my die cut machine. And I want to do a little bit of ink blending to add some dimension to this. So I'm going to take the Vintage Photo Distress Oxide and one of the blender brushes and just lightly go over the top of that sandy beach, just to add a little bit of color to it. Once I'm happy with the ink blending on my ocean bottom here, I'm going to take Walnut Stain Distress Oxide and I'm going to squish that down onto my craft mat, spritz a little bit of water and mix it together, and then flick that onto my background. Make sure you move your ocean background out of the way so you don't get your brown splatters on that. And that'll just add a little interest to that as well. Back to our handmade stencil, I want this to be able to stay on my cardstock without moving. So I'm going to spray Pixie Spray to the back of this cardstock piece that I have. This is just a really nice low tack, so it's going to hold our cardstock in place while we apply our medium. It doesn't rip the paper when you remove it, and you'll see all of that here in just a moment, but this is just going to lightly tack down onto our ink blended cardstock. I did make sure to let that cardstock sit for a little while, make sure that my background is dry, and I'm going to bring in the Nouveau Glimmer Paste in Moonstone. This is one of my absolute favorite products to use. It is so gorgeous. It has a lot of sparkle, and it still shows through the color that's behind it. So I'm just taking a spatula and digging some out and putting it off on the side of my mat. The reason I'm doing that or bringing it out kind of separately is that normally with stencils, I would swipe any leftovers back into a jar. Well, when you're working with oxides, this glimmer paste is going to pick up that color. So you don't want to contaminate your jar with colored glimmer paste. So it's best to just scoop a little bit out on the side and pick it up as you need it. Now I'm using a tonic spatula for this, and if it looks awkward, it's because this is the first time I've used them. I just got these in recently, but I do really like it because you can see it's really flexible. So I'm picking up a little bit of that glimmer paste and I'm just smushing that down onto my background, going with the guide of that stencil and pulling it down. Now what I really liked about this spatula is I'm able to get a soft ending to these rays. Some of it's going to be hidden by the ocean bottom, but normally if I would use a plastic spatula, I would get kind of a harsh line at the end. This gives me a really nice fade off. I'll continue spreading this Nouveau paste out so it's nice, even. And you'll be able to see on my spatula, it is tinted a little blue because it's picking up some of that Oxide ink. And then once I'm done, I'll pull up my stencil, just be very careful. And we're left with this beautiful background. And it doesn't take that long to dry, but what you want to do is, whether you're using regular stencils or the handmade ones, clean off your tools and mat immediately. You do not want this stuck, especially with the glitter that's in there, because it gets kind of scratchy. So clean up your supplies right away. I just use a baby wipe and we're left with this gorgeous shimmer on our background. So I'll set that off on the side to dry, and I'm going to work on some Copic coloring. I do have quite a few images stamped out here. I'll have all of the stamp sets that I use listed at the bottom of the screen here, so you can pause that at any time or check the supply list down below. I used Seahorsin Around, Keep on Swimming, Fintastic Friends, Say What Christmas Critters, and Ahoy Matey. And I will also be listing the color of Copic markers that I used. These were just a real simple, most of them are a simple 2-color blend, sometimes 3 depending on the size of the image. Now you don't need to use this many images in your background. If you wanted to keep it simple with just a couple, you could certainly do that. It would still turn out amazing. I just thought that I had a lot of these stamp sets, and you could even bring in some of the minis if you like to collect the minis. There are some cute underwater critters in there as well. Now the speech bubble, that is from the Say What Christmas Critters. I'm not going to color that. I just was doing all of my stamping and I thought I'd get that stamped out right away. That is where my sentiment is going to go. So I just have that stamped up there for me. Now while I'm finishing getting these all colored up, you can see I went with kind of a rainbow theme. I was using almost every color I could find since there were so many images to color in. But with this do-it-yourself stencil and using that glimmer paste, you could definitely turn that around and make that into a sunrise. You could add that to any of your ink blended sunrise backgrounds. I just thought it would be really neat to have the sun rays coming through the ocean. And since there were some great ocean critter stamp sets from Lawnfawn, it was just a great way to combine the two. So once I have all of these colored in, and I did forget my treasure chest there, so I had to go back and finish that in. But once I have that done, I'm just going to take the coordinating dies for these, hold them in place with some low-tack tape, and run those through my die cut machine. So this is the look at all of the images, all die cut out and ready. I also had a die cut from Cilantro cardstock, some seaweed from the Ocean Shadow Box add-on. I want to add a little bit of seaweed to help my background a little bit. For the front sentiment on my card, I'm using Critter Chatter. I thought this bloop bloop was really adorable on these, so I'm going to take that speech bubble that I had die cut out, and I'm stamping this in Peacock ink. So I'm going to stamp the bloop twice, and I will also stamp on the inside of my card. I'll show you later so it has a translation. I think this is just a genius idea and just so adorable. Once I have that stamped out, I'm going to start working on the rest of my elements for my card using this Just Stitching double rectangle. That's going to leave just the stitching. It's not going to actually cut it out. So I'm lining that up on a piece of white cardstock that's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and it left me those great stitching lines. And I want this to be just a border around my ink blended panel. So I'm going to take my Tim Holtz trimmer and I'm going to cut this down so I just have a white border around that stitching. And I'm lining that stitching up with the edge of my clear, what is that, like a ruler that's on there? But it's a clear edge before the actual cutting point. And that's going to make it nice and even all the way around. So once I have this trimmed out, that lines up perfectly, on my peacock cardstock, which is going to be my card base. Then I did trim down my ink blended panel to fit right inside of that, so I have a white border on there to really make my background pop. And I can start putting this together a little bit. I'm using these sandy beach accents to die cut out some little spots so I can add some of my elements to be tucked into the sand. Once those are lined up on that, I can hold that in place and run that through my die cut machine. Then I can just remove that purple tape, and that'll leave me just the little slots where I can tuck things in. And I think that is just a super cool way to add things to the beach scene. Now I can just start attaching my card. I'm not going to add any foam to this part of it on the panels because I am going to add dimension with my fish. So I'm just attaching these with the tape runner, making sure I'm leaving an even edge all the way around. And then I'll start working on adding my critters. So I'll start with that beach bottom. And I'm just going to slightly tuck things in. I added a little bit of liquid glue to the bottom of them so that it holds them in place. I have some gold pieces that I tucked behind that treasure chest and also in front. And then I have my little clams. One is tucked in. And then I'll also start adding this seaweed. So some of them I did add right to the front. And I'll put just some little critters in front of that. And then some of them I am adding a little bit of the liquid glue and tucking them behind. I am going to add foam tape to this later. When I have the ocean bottom done, I'm going to take it and line it up to the bottom of my card, so that way I can get an idea where I need to place my fish. So I'm not going to attach anything just yet. I'm just going to line it all up. I want to make sure I'm leaving room for that sentiment at the top. Now, some of the items I can start kind of tucking down, so some of the goldfish with, yes, I know there's no goldfish in the ocean, but they were super cute. And I really loved the one that was facing forward, so I just had to have them in there. But once that's all lined up, then I can start adding foam tape to the back of all the fish. Some of them, like I said, the goldfish, I just added down with liquid glue because I tucked them behind some of the items. And then I will add the foam tape to the back of my ocean bottom. So I applied as much foam tape as I could to make sure that stays secure. Once I remove the backing of the foam tape and add my ocean bottom to this, that will finish off the front of the card, and we could start taking a look at creating on the inside of the card. So I did use a piece of white cardstock as my base, and I opened that up and placed it in my MISTI. I'm going back to the Critter Chatter, and I'm going to stamp in here first that says translation because we have bloop bloop on the front, so we want to translate it so the recipient knows what we're trying to say. And I stamped that in the peacock ink. And then I'm bringing in another sentiment here and stamping that right underneath. So I'll just line that up straight using the grid on my MISTI tool. And then I can just fold that over with my bone folder, crease that really well, and I can attach the front of my card panel now. Once I attached it, I did notice I had a little bit of extra white off on the side, so I'll just trim that off with my scissors. And then I'll give you a closer look at the front of this card with all of its gorgeous sparkle. I really hope you give this Nuvo Glimmer Paste a try. This is the Moonstone. It adds so much to a background. It's just beautiful, and I think it looks great in this ocean scene. Thank you so much for joining me today, and have an amazing day.